Serial killers have turned countless victims into prey, leaving their loved ones broken and hurting. Have you ever thought what it feels like to be hunted by a monster? I am 101% sure this causes chills in your spine. Their twisted minds have led to some of the most dreadful crimes in history. Let's explore the depths of their sin and discover the shitless details of their brutal acts.
He was the oldest son of a wealthy mother and father.
Few cases in the annals of courtroom justice are as disturbing as that of Suumo Miyazaki. Born into a wealthy family in Japan, Miyazaki's life seemed ordinary at first glance, but beneath the surface, a horrifying darkness brewed.
And bits of his interrogation that was used against him. Of course, there's nothing to the extent that would get me banned off of YouTube, but this video is going to go over some pretty grotesque things, so strap yourselves or click away now.
His come down into madness began in the late 1980s, when he committed a series of gruesome crimes that would forever scar the nation. Miyazaki targeted young girls, drawing them away from safety and into his twisted world. Over just 1 year, from 1988 to 1989, he kidnapped, murdered, and mutilated 4 innocent children. The details of his crimes are almost too horrific to describe. He not only took their lives, but desecrated their bodies in ways that shocked even the most seasoned investigators.
Miyazaki was born into a wealthy family who operated a successful newspaper company in Japan, which of course is discontinued now. Although his parents were almost too busy to be involved in his life, they were extremely strict on him and pushed for him to be successful. But his timid and introverted nature was a major obstacle in his life, and he was born with a condition where his hand joints and wrists were fused together. This heavily affected Miyazaki's performance in school, but he was still passing classes with flying colors. There are claims that say that this defect might have been the result of him being a child of incest between his father and his older sister, so Miyazaki wasn't exactly born in the best circumstances.
What made Miyazaki's crimes even more chilling was his systematic approach. He kept detailed records of his killings, documenting them as if they were mere tasks to be completed. He even sent letters to the families of his victims, taunting them with the knowledge of their children's suffering. This was a man who succeeded in the terror he created.
His victims were Marikano, Masami Yoshizawa, Erika Namba, and Ayako Nomoto. Miyazaki burned the rest of Marikono's bones and put the ashes in a box, along with some of her teeth, to send to the family.
When Miyazaki was finally arrested, the full extent of his sin came to light. In his home, police found a collection of disturbing videos and images that revealed the depths of his twisted mind. The following trial was one of Japan's most infamous, as the courtroom became a battleground for justice against a man who seemed more monster than human.
Keep in mind that in trial, Miyazaki denied ever making the alias name Yuko Imada.
During the proceedings, Miyazaki showed little guilt. His behavior was unstable, and he often appeared detached from the gravity of his actions. Despite attempts by his defense to plead, the court found him fully responsible for his crimes.
慎重にも慎重に検討を加えた結果、この3名を粛々と執行させていただくことに決めたわけで、正義の実現のために法の支配する国をしっかり守っていくために、粛々と死刑を執行しております。
In 2008, nearly 2 decades after his arrest, Suumo Miyazaki was executed, bringing a sense of closure to a case that had haunted Japan for years. Courtroom justice may have prevailed, but the scars left by Miyazaki's actions remain.
At 5, guilty on all counts. The jury coming back with that verdict in the trial of Zetas cartel boss Marciano Vasquez.
Yeah, that verdict coming in just about 30 minutes ago. Our Stephanie Cerna joins us live from outside the federal courthouse with the details. Steph?
Well, the lawyer for Vasquez talked to us just a few minutes ago, saying he was surprised by the verdict, given there was no direct evidence. Now, Vasquez on trial for the murder of hundreds of men, women, and children while trafficking drugs in Mexico. Prosecutors say Vasquez was the director of huge shipments of drugs across the border as a Zeta boss in Piedras Negras. However, Vasquez's attorney says it was the prosecution's witness statement about a 6-year-old girl who was mutilated and eventually killed in front of her parents that turned the jury.
Marciano Vasquez, a notorious figure in the Los Zetas cartel, has been sentenced to 7 life sentences for his crimes, including the murders of at least 29 people. This history begins in the violent world of drug trafficking in northern Mexico, where Vasquez, known as Chano, rose through the ranks as a hitman before becoming a plaza boss. His reign of terror lasted from 2009 until his arrest in 2015, leaving a trail of bloodshed and fear in his wake.
Marciano Vasquez is facing murder, conspiracy, and drug distribution charges. Gustavo Rodriguez faced the same charges, but as part of a plea deal for a reduced sentence, he agreed to testify against Vasquez.
During his trial, witnesses recounted how he dismembered a young girl with an axe in front of her parents, laughing as he burned her remains, chillingly telling the father, "So you'll remember me." It was just one of many brutal acts showing his lack of kindness. The jury found him guilty on multiple charges, including murder, drug trafficking, and using minors in drug-related crimes, solidifying his reputation as a ruthless enforcer. Vasquez's control over the Piedras Negras drug corridor meant he was responsible for the distribution of massive quantities of drugs, including marijuana and cocaine, into the United States.
11 different people who were familiar with the defendant, were familiar with the activities he was involved in, testified, but there was a bunch of direct evidence too that's been omitted in the coverage, and the jury heard about that, and that was a big point during the trial, and we think they considered that.
His violent methods were not just about power, they were a message to anyone who dared to cross him or his cartel. U.S. Attorney Richard Durbin described him as someone who acted without mercy, inflicting extreme suffering on his victims and their families. Marciano Vasquez's story is a horrifying chapter in the ongoing battle against organized crime, leaving a lasting impact on both sides of the border.
You like those? They're good, eh? What's he eating? Don't eat the paper, bud. It's the bones for you.
It's like a kit, a baby. They open the front like.
Buddy, sit.
He doesn't want to bark on it. Oh, I'm kidding.
Carla Homolka and Paul Bernardo, a seemingly ordinary couple from Canada, turned out to be anything but not ordinary. Behind closed doors, they committed crimes that shocked everyone. Their story starts in the late 1980s when they met and quickly became inseparable. But their relationship took a dark turn as they started feeding off each other's twisted desires.
Despite all that, Bernardo maintained he had always planned to let his captives go.
Probably. Why?
Homolka was the prosecution's key witness. She cut a deal for a reduced sentence in exchange for her testimony. She said just days after cutting Mahaffey's body into 10 pieces. The Homolka sisters, all 3 of them, enjoying a holiday just weeks before Tammy was raped and killed by Bernardo and her own sister.
Look at that body.
Bernardo was already known as the Scarborough Rapist, having assaulted numerous women in the Toronto area.
Canadian couple Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka appeared to be love's young dream.
When he met Carla, they shared an appetite for violence. Together, they planned and committed the kidnapping, rape, and murder of 3 young women, including Carla's sister, Tammy Homolka.
Why? Homolka was the prosecution's key witness. She cut a deal for a reduced sentence in exchange for her testimony. She said just days after cutting Mahaffey's body into 10 pieces.
The level of evilness with both these people is so extreme. These people were animals.
What drove this seemingly clean-cut couple to their appalling crimes?
There was Carla Homolka raping, torturing right alongside her husband, and she seemed to be enjoying it.
Tammy was their first victim, drugged and assaulted by the couple on Christmas Eve in 1990. The crime was so brutal that it led to her death, which they initially disguised as an accident. But this was just the beginning.
Over the next 36 hours, Paul Bernardo assaulted his victim repeatedly.
Over the next 2 years, Carla and Paul continue capturing and torturing 2 more young girls, Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. They videotaped the assaults, revealing the depths of their cruelty.
Shortly thereafter, it became very clear that, that something was terribly wrong.
The crime was escalating in this small, quiet, perfect little town.
The couple's crimes eventually caught up with them. In 1993, Bernardo was arrested, and the truth about their monstrous acts came to light. Homolka struck a deal with prosecutors, attesting against Bernardo in exchange for a lighter sentence, which angered the public. Bernardo was sentenced to life in prison, where he remains. Carla, after serving 12 years, was released in 2005 and has since attempted to live a quiet life, though her past continues to haunt her.
I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself. This was a case to tell the world that I did what I did not for reasons of hate. I hated no one. I knew I was sick or evil or both.
Jeffrey Dahmer's story begins in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where he was born on May 21, 1960. He seemed fine as a kid, but things took a strange turn as he got older. By the time he graduated high school in 1978, he had developed a troubling fascination with animal corpses and a heavy drinking problem. Just weeks after finishing school, he committed his first murder.
We started looking around a little bit and make sure there were no other victims or anybody else in the apartment, and there were human heads and bones and things all over.
He picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks and, after a night of drinking, struck him with a dumbbell when Hicks tried to leave. Dahmer then hid Hicks's body and buried the remains in his backyard.
Though he accepted the blame for his barbaric crimes, cannibalizing, even crudely lobotomizing some of his victims, Dahmer nonetheless asked for forgiveness.
I should have stayed with God. I tried and failed and created a Holocaust. And if I could give my life right now to bring their loved ones back, I would do it.
Years passed before Dahmer struck again. After serving in the Army, he returned home and continued his downward spiral into alcoholism. By the mid-1980s, he was attracting men to his apartment, where he would drug, assault, and kill them.
My name is Rita Isel, and I'm the oldest sister of Errol Lindsay. Whatever your name is, Satan. I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control. I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you, mother. I hate you. This is out of control. Don't me, Jeffrey. I kill you. Look at me, mother. I can kill you.
Punch and race fast.
I can kill you. You don't have to.
His methods included dismemberment and even cannibalism. On July 22, 1991, Dahmer's rule of terror came to an end when one of his intended victims, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape and alert the police. When authorities entered Dahmer's apartment, they were met with a horrifying scene, filled with photographs of dismembered bodies and human remains.
You are loving, you are a little bit sadistic at times, even in courtroom, you know what I'm saying? which is a normal thing, because that's your job, you know.
You don't think I'm having sexual arousal?
I don't think so. Not that time. Not that time. Not that time.
Dahmer was arrested and later confessed to killing 17 young men. His trial began in January 1992, where he claimed silliness, but the jury found him sane and guilty. He received 15 life sentences. On November 28, 1994, he was murdered in prison, closing a dark chapter in criminal history.
Did you at any time ever use an ice pick?
No, sir.
You struck Miss Lamp with a sledgehammer. Do you recall the sledgehammer which was introduced?
Yes, sir, I recall it.
Was that true?
No, sir.
Lawrence Bittaker, with an IQ of 138, dragged high school girls into his van, then murdered them by twisting a coat hanger around their throat with a pair of pliers. When his tape recording of one murder was played in court, people rushed outside and vomited.
I touched Miss Ledford on the breast with cold metal pliers And if you listen to the tape, you'll hear those pliers being replaced in the toolbox a few seconds later.
Oh, what did you touch her on the breastbone with a pair of pliers?
To shock her with the cold metal.
Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris are two twisted souls who would forever be known as the Toolbox Killers, a horrifying journey of rape, torture, and murder in the summer of 1979. Bittaker, born in Pennsylvania with an IQ of 138, and Norris, a Colorado native, met while serving at the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo. Despite their differences, Bittaker being the brains and Norris the muscle, they found a common interest in sadism and began winding twisted tales of their future exploits.
Bittaker was working as a machinist at a manufacturing plant in Burbank during a strike when he was arrested. The ex-convict testified at a National Labor Relations Board hearing that he once brandished a replica of a .45 automatic while driving through the picket line.
Apparently they neglected him quite a bit as well. There was never enough food in the house, he'd rarely get new clothes. He said his parents would often blame him for things he hadn't done as well. Shortly after the release of Norris, both men put some money together and bought a silver 1977 GMC cargo van with no windows in the back and a sliding door on the passenger side. They modified it and installed a folding bed. And underneath it, they stored a cooler to keep drinks in, which was a big part of their plan to lure teenage girls into the van. But next to the coolers there was also a toolbox, complete with pliers, a sledgehammer, and even ice picks. They named their van the Murder Mac.
After their release on parole in late 1978 and early 1979, the duo's reign of terror began. They targeted young women, some as young as 13, kidnapping them into their van, which they had nicknamed Murder Mac. Walking home or hitching, the girls never stood a chance against the pair. Once inside the van, the nightmare evolved as Bittaker and Norris subjected their victims to unimaginable horrors, using everyday tools like pliers, ice picks, and screwdrivers to inflict pain, and ultimately, death.
This time they tried something different. Norris hid in the back of the van while Bittaker stopped and offered Andrew a cool drink. Jackie Gilliam and Leah Lamp were 15 and 13 years old. The two girls were thrown over an embankment. Jackie and Leah were reported missing by their families, but the police treated this as a runaway case, which is something that happened a lot in the 70s. So many missing people cases were treated as runaways, losing the critical first few hours when it's a lot easier to trace back the missing person's steps and locate witnesses. This reminds me of the case of Pamela Hobley and Patricia Spencer, which we covered a few videos ago. They also disappeared without trace and were never found. And the police treated it like a runaway too, so they didn't actually start investigating properly until days later. It's very possible that having started the investigation earlier, they would have found something, but who knows.
Over 5 months, Bittaker and Norris claimed the lives of at least 5 teenage girls: Lucinda Lynn Schaefer, 16, Andrea Joy Hall, 18, Jacqueline Doris Gilliam, 15, Jacqueline Leah Lamp, 13, and Shirley Lynette Ledford, 16.
While he told her to keep screaming, he punched her breast and hit her several times with a sledgehammer. But soon enough, he told the police everything about the abductions, how they forced the girls into the van or lured them in with drugs and alcohol.
The killers didn't just end their victims' lives, they also captured their suffering on audio and film, with Bittaker taking Polaroids of the assaults. The Ledford tapes played in court brought many to tears, including the prosecutor, Stephen Kay, who described the pair as worse than Manson.
driving my girlfriend in a stolen car. Nobody at work or school, nobody at home rather, home or school, had asked me what I'm going to do after graduation. I had no idea in the world. I was just drifting through life. And nobody was helping me figure out which way to go.
The duo's reign of terror came to an end when Norris, in a moment of guilt or fear, confessed to a fellow inmate about their crimes. The inmate, in turn, alerted the authorities, leading to the arrest of Bittaker and Norris on November 20th, 1979. Norris, in an appeal bargain, agreed to testify against Bittaker, who was sentenced to death on March 22, 1981. Despite California's suspension of executions, Bittaker remained on death row for over 30 years, filing endless appeals until his natural death in 2019. Norris, sentenced to 45 years to life, died just 2 months after Bittaker in February 2020. The bodies of Schaefer and Hall were never found, leaving their families without closure. It's important to remember that behind every story lies a search for courtroom justice. Justice may take time, but it ultimately wins, ensuring that the memories of those lost are honored and that such horrors are never forgotten. Thank you for joining us on this dark journey.